The autumn breeze swept across the grounds of Buckingham Palace, carrying the crisp scent of fallen leaves as tourists gathered in respectful clusters, cameras poised to capture the stoic guardsmen in their iconic scarlet tunics and bearskin caps. Among the ceremonial sentries stood Guard Silas Pennington, his posture immaculate, his discipline forged through years of service that the casual observer could never fathom. The brass buttons on his uniform gleamed in the afternoon light, each one meticulously polished that morning in a ritual that predated the guard himself by centuries. Though only 32, the subtle lines around his eyes told of deployments far from these ceremonial grounds, places where his training had been tested not for show but for survival. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and countless classified operations had tempered his resolve long before he'd earned the honor of this ceremonial post. Though nothing in his perfectly composed features betrayed this history to the casual observer. "Move it, people," celebrity coming through. The abrasive American accent sliced through the respectful murmurs of the crowd like a serrated knife. Axel the Devastator Carter bulldozed his way toward the palace gates, his designer tracksuit an explosion of garish logos that seemed deliberately at odds with the dignified surroundings. Fresh from a controversial split-decision victory in last night's pay-per-view event, he carried himself with the exaggerated swagger of a man who believed his own marketing. "This place is like a museum, man," Axel announced to no one in particular, his voice deliberately loud enough to turn heads. All this fancy pants tradition and guys playing dress-up, his training partners, Derek and Sean, flanked him like remors attached to a shark. Their matching Team Devastator jackets marking them as extensions of Axel's ego rather than individuals. An elderly woman clutched her handbag tighter as Axel shouldered past her, not even registering her disapproving glare. "Watch the technique videos yet?" he barked at Derek, who nodded enthusiastically. "That British military guy I destroyed last month, total joke. All that discipline and training useless in a real fight." As Axel's gaze fell upon Silas standing at attention, something predatory flickered across his face. The guard's perfect stillness seemed to trigger something in the fighter, a challenge, perhaps, or the recognition of an easy target for his performative dominance. Pennington remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward. But beneath his ceremonial exterior lay the cold readiness of a man who had faced far more dangerous adversaries than an overconfident cage fighter. "Check this out," Axel nudged Derek, nodding toward Silas. "This is what they call a soldier around here. Just stands there like a mannequin." His voice carried deliberately across the courtyard, drawing uncomfortable glances from nearby tourists. "Hey, buddy," he called out, approaching Silas with the casual entitlement of someone unused to boundaries. "Does your face hurt from not moving all day?" Pennington remained perfectly still, his eyes focused on a distant point, his chest barely moving with each measured breath. Years of military discipline had prepared him for provocations far more challenging than a loud American with something to prove. "See that?" Axel turned to his companions, gesturing expansively. "This is why I don't respect military training. It's all about following orders, standing still, looking pretty. Put this guy in an octagon for 5 minutes, he'd be destroyed." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, the diamond studs in his ears catching the afternoon light. "I mean, I just took down an ex-military last night." Campbell thought his Royal Marines training would save him tapped out in the second round. A small cluster of tourists had paused their photography to watch the scene unfold. Among them, a broad-shouldered man in civilian clothes shifted his weight subtly, the bearing of military service evident in his posture despite his casual attire. His companion whispered something, but he shook his head slightly, eyes never leaving the developing situation. "The problem with military guys," Axel continued, pacing in front of Silas like a lecturer addressing a class, "is they train for some theoretical battlefield. I train for reality, for the cage, where it's just you, your skills, and nowhere to hide." He moved closer to Pennington, deliberately invading the invisible boundary that most visitors respectfully maintained. "No fancy uniform to hide behind there, soldier boy." Pennington's expression remained impassive, but those with trained eyes might have noticed the slight tightening at the corners of his jaw, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. Not signs of intimidation, but rather the mechanical adjustments of a finely tuned instrument preparing for whatever might come. "I bet they told you not to move, right?" Axel's face was now uncomfortably close to the guards. That's the difference between us. You're trained to stay still, I'm trained to strike. He snapped his fingers inches from Pennington's face, letting out a bark of laughter when the guard didn't flinch. Like I said, guys, programming, not fighting. The off-duty military man in the crowd took a half step forward before catching himself, his companion's hand gently restraining his arm. The tension in the courtyard had shifted from tourist excitement to something more uncomfortable, the crowd instinctively recognizing the boundary being crossed between harmless spectacle and genuine disrespect. "Let me show you what real combat training looks like," Axel announced, backing up to give himself space. With theatrical precision, he dropped into a fighting stance, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. "See this base? This is power position, your military stance." He gestured dismissively at Pennington's formal posture. "All for show, no functional combat application." Derek pulled out his phone, angling for the best shot as Axel began demonstrating punching combinations in the air near Silas. Each movement was executed with undeniable skill, his body a testament to years of dedicated training. But there was something performative about it all, as if the palace courtyard were just another platform for his brand. "That right hook is what put Campbell on the mat," Axel explained, throwing the punch in slow motion. Your military buddy never saw it coming, too busy thinking about his proper form instead of protecting his jaw. He circled around, deliberately positioning himself where Pennington would have to break protocol to keep him in sight. That's why military training fails in real combat situations. Too rigid, too many rules. You're fundamentally misunderstanding the purpose of different combat disciplines. A quiet voice came from the crowd. The off-duty military man had spoken, his tone measured but carrying the unmistakable authority of experience. Military combat training and sport fighting have entirely different objectives. Axel's head snapped toward the voice, his eyes narrowing. "Oh yeah, and who might you be, another parade ground soldier?" The contempt in his voice was palpable, his stance shifting subtly toward this new challenger. "Just someone who understands the difference between performance and service," the man replied evenly, making no move to approach or escalate. "Performance?" Axel's face darkened. "I've broken bones, man. I've choked out champions. What do you know about real fighting?" He dismissed the man with a wave, turning his attention back to Pennington. "This is what I'm talking about, all this military worship. These guys stand around looking pretty while guys like me do actual combat." Sean leaned in, whispering something that made Axel laugh. "My buddy here wants to see if the toy soldier has any reflexes at all," he announced, moving back into Pennington's space. "Military training is obsolete, Nan. Modern MMA incorporates everything useful and discards the ceremonial garbage." Axel began demonstrating takedown setups, moving with increasing proximity to the motionless guard. "This is a level change," he narrated, dropping his center of gravity. "From here, I can attack the legs, force my opponent off balance." His movements brought him within inches of making contact with Pennington's immaculate uniform. "Your military defenses have no answer for this." Throughout this display, Pennington remained perfectly still, his discipline absolute. Yet there was something in his eyes, a quality that the more perceptive observers might recognize. Not fear, not anger, but the calm assessment of a trained combatant. Those eyes had seen actual combat, had made split-second decisions with lives at stake. They were the eyes of someone who understood the vast gulf between fighting for sport and fighting for survival. "See how he just stands there?" Axel straightened up, addressing his growing audience. In a real fight, he'd already be on the ground. All that training, all that ceremony useless. He circled Pennington like a shark, each pass bringing him closer. "That's why I've defeated every military guy they've put in front of me. Your discipline is just a pretty wrapper around outdated techniques." The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the spectacle. Most watched with uncomfortable expressions, recognizing the disrespect but uncertain how to respond. Palace security had noticed who a uniformed officer in the distance was speaking into his radio, his gaze fixed on the developing situation. "Let me break it down for all you tourists." Axel positioned himself squarely in front of Pennington, assuming the role of impromptu lecturer. Military combat training is designed around group tactics and weapons. Strip that away. And what do you have? Outdated striking techniques and grappling that would get destroyed in any modern MMA gym. He began moving through a series of technical demonstrations, each one bringing him uncomfortably close to Silas. See this angle. This is where military hand-to-hand fails. They're taught to create distance for a weapon draw. I'm taught to close that distance and dominate. His elbow brushed past Silas's chest, a near miss that caused several onlookers to inhale sharply. Last month, I sparred with 3 Royal Marines on leave, Axel continued, shadowboxing within inches of Pennington's impassive face. Nice guys, tough as hell, but clueless in close quarters, too programmed to buy the book. First guy tried some textbook armbar, ended up face down with me controlling his back in seconds. Derek and Sean had positioned themselves to capture different angles of Axel's impromptu performance, their phones tracking his movements as he continued his one-sided technical critique. Military training creates predictability, Axel explained, feinting a strike that stopped just short of Pennington's jaw. In the octagon, predictability gets you knocked out. The palace security officer was now moving with purpose through the crowd, his expression grim as he spoke urgently into his radio. The off-duty military man had also begun to move closer, his bearing suggesting an intervention was imminent. The biggest joke, Axel laughed, completing a spinning kick that deliberately ended inches from Pennington's torso. These guys think standing motionless for hours builds combat readiness. Real fighters know that's garbage. Dynamic adaptation, split-second timing, that's what keeps you alive in a real fight. He dropped into a wrestler's stance, hands hovering near Pennington's legs as if preparing for a takedown demonstration. This position right here from this distance, no military defense manual has an answer. Your training says maintain distance, mine says close and destroy. His fingers were now mere centimeters from making contact with the immaculate red uniform. Hey, Axel, show him that clinch control you used on Campbell, Sean called out, adjusting his camera angle for a better shot. The one that set up the submission. Good idea, Axel nodded, rising to a standing position. See, the military teaches these rigid blocks and counters, but in real fighting, it's all about control points and pressure. He raised his hands to demonstrate, moving them toward Pennington's shoulders. Like this collar tie. From here, I can control posture, deliver elbows, set up throws. The crowd's murmurs had taken on a distinct note of concern. A mother hurriedly ushered her children away from the scene, while several tourists lowered their cameras, no longer comfortable documenting what was clearly crossing a line from spectacle into harassment. I've dominated military guys from 6 different countries, Axel declared, now fully immersed in his demonstration. Same story every time. All that discipline, all that tradition falls apart when faced with modern fighting methods. He shifted his weight, preparing for his next demonstration, seemingly oblivious to the security personnel now pushing through the crowd toward him. This is the moment your military training fails you, Axel announced, setting his feet for what appeared to be a takedown feint. In traditional combat, there's this gap, this moment of decision where you evaluate threat level, appropriate response protocols. His voice took on a mocking official tone with the last words. In that same moment, I've already made my move. He exploded forward in a perfectly executed level change, the same movement that had earned him multiple victories in the cage. The motion brought him within a hair's breadth of making contact with Pennington's legs, stopping just short in a display of carefully calibrated control. When the guard remained motionless, Axel's expression shifted from showmanship to something uglier, the frustrated look of a man whose provocations had failed to elicit the desired response. Nothing, really, he straightened up, genuine disbelief crossing his features. Let's try something more direct. Then, with deliberate intent, he stepped even closer, the boundary between demonstration and actual physical challenge now paper-thin. In a clinch situation, control comes from dominating these key points. There was a collective gasp from the onlookers as Axel's hand made definitive contact with Pennington's shoulder, fingers gripping the immaculate red fabric of the ceremonial uniform. From this position, I can manipulate balance, control the head, dictate the entire engagement, he continued, seemingly oblivious to the line he had just crossed. The world seemed to pause for one crystallized moment. The autumn breeze stilled, The tourist chatter silenced. Even the distant London traffic seemed to fade away. In that microsecond of perfect tension, Silas Pennington remained motionless, but something fundamental had changed. The air around him seemed to vibrate with potential energy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Those closest to the scene would later describe a subtle shift in the guard's eyes, not a movement in the technical sense, but a transition from ceremonial presence to something entirely different. The eyes of a soldier who had made life-or-death decisions under fire, who had operated in environments where mistakes were measured in blood, not points or referee interventions. The off-duty military man had frozen mid-step, recognition dawning on his face. He knew what was about to happen, not from any overt signal, but from the invisible communication that exists between those who have stood in harm's way under a nation's flag. His expression wasn't alarm, but rather grim acknowledgement. Axel, interpreting Pennington's continued stillness as proof of his theories, increased the pressure on the guard's shoulder, preparing to demonstrate the next stage of his technique. See how he still doesn't react. This is why military guys get. The transition that followed happened so swiftly that many witnesses would later disagree about exactly what they saw. One moment, Axel's hand was gripping the scarlet uniform, his face alive with the smug satisfaction of someone proving their point. The next instant, the dynamics of the entire scene had fundamentally altered in a way that no one, least of all Axel Carter, had anticipated. A Japanese tourist would later describe it as like watching water flow around a stone. A former police officer from Chicago would say it reminded him of the economy of motion you only see in elite tactical units. A retired ballet dancer from Paris would use the phrase perfect minimalism, not one degree of movement wasted. All would agree on one thing: what they witnessed wasn't a fight or a contest. It was the precise application of functional expertise against theatrical bravado. The crowd collectively held its breath, the atmosphere charged with the electricity of witnessing something authentic in a world of performance. Several tourists unconsciously took a step back, creating a wider perimeter as their instincts recognized the shift from entertainment to genuine professional response. Even the pigeons seemed to sense the change, taking flight from nearby ledges in a sudden flutter of wings that punctuated the moment. Pennington's response was so precisely calibrated that it seemed almost minimal: a slight pivot of the torso, a subtle shift in weight distribution, and a single economical movement of his right arm. There was nothing theatrical about it, nothing designed for cameras or audiences. The motion simply transferred Axel's own forward momentum and redirected it, causing the fighter's grip to break and his balance to falter. In that same fluid sequence, Pennington's white-gloved hand clamped onto Axel's wrist with mechanical precision, applying a textbook joint manipulation that produced immediate compliance without unnecessary force. The hold wasn't designed to damage or showcase dominance, it was engineered solely to neutralize a threat with maximum efficiency and minimum harm. "Step back, sir." Pennington's voice, unused for hours, carried the undiluted authority of the parade ground and battlefield combined. And like Axel's performative volume, these words were delivered at conversational level, yet somehow filled the entire courtyard. "You have made physical contact with a member of the Queen's Guard. That is an offense." Axel, caught entirely off guard by the sudden role reversal, instinctively attempted to counter with a technique that had served him well in the octagon: a quick twist and lever designed to break the grip. The move faltered against Pennington's hold, which adjusted with microscopic precision to render the counter ineffective without increasing pressure or causing pain. "Release me, man." Axel's voice had lost its lecturing confidence, replaced by the startled tone of someone whose physical reality had just been unexpectedly rewritten. "Unauthorized contact with a guard on duty is a security violation," Pennington continued, his tone unchanged. His grip maintained exactly the minimum pressure required, no more, no less. "Palace security has been alerted. Remain still." Axel's training kicked in, and he attempted a more aggressive counter, dropping his center of gravity and twisting to create leverage. The movement, which would have effectively broken most holds in a competitive setting, seemed to evaporate against Pennington's technique. There was no contest of strength, no dramatic struggle, just the mathematical certainty of angles and pressure points applied with surgical precision. Military hand-to-hand isn't designed for sport competition, the off-duty officer explained to the stunned onlookers, stepping forward now that the situation was contained. It's engineered for immediate threat neutralization with minimal force. He addressed the crowd with the clear diction of someone accustomed to briefings. What you're seeing isn't fighting in the competitive sense. It's the application of security protocols. Axel made one final attempt to assert control, driving forward with his shoulder in a move that would create space in any cage match. Pennington's response was a minute adjustment that transferred the energy of the attempt into the ground like lightning conducted harmlessly away. The guard's expression remained professionally neutral throughout. No anger, no triumph, not even exertion, just the mechanical execution of duty. Your techniques are impressive in their context, Pennington stated matter-of-factly, maintaining his hold as palace security personnel approached rapidly from multiple directions. But they're optimized for different parameters, different objectives. Not a lecture or a boast, simply an operational assessment delivered with professional courtesy. The arriving security officers moved efficiently to take control of the situation, their own training evident in their coordinated approach. "We'll take it from here, Sergeant Pennington," the lead officer acknowledged, addressing the guard with proper rank, a detail that caused Axel's companions to exchange nervous glances as the implications of whom they had been harassing became clearer. As security established a perimeter, the off-duty military man stepped closer. "For the record," he said, loud enough for nearby tourists to hear, Sergeant Pennington served with distinction in multiple combat deployments before his ceremonial posting. The Guards regiments draw from the elite of British Army combat units, not parade grounds. He looked directly at Axel, who was now being formally detained by security personnel. "What you mistook for a statue was a combat veteran showing you the courtesy of restraint." "You don't understand who I am," Axel protested as security officers firmly guided him toward the exit, his confident swagger replaced by indignant sputtering. "I'm a professional athlete. I was just demonstrating techniques. Assaulting a Queen's Guard is a criminal offense, sir," the lead security officer replied without emotion. "Regardless of how you choose to characterize it," he nodded to his colleagues, who maintained their professional grip on Axel's arms, neither excessive nor yielding. Derek and Sean, suddenly aware that their recording devices were now potential evidence in a criminal matter, had lowered their phones, their previous enthusiasm evaporating in the face of actual consequences. "We weren't part of this, man," Sean began, distancing himself with the speed of someone recognizing a sinking ship. "We were just watching." The off-duty military officer had remained near Pennington, occasionally glancing toward the guard with the subtle respect of someone who understood exactly what had transpired. "What you just witnessed," he explained to nearby tourists who were still processing the scene, "wasn't about fighting skill in the competitive sense. Sergeant Pennington applied exactly the minimum force required by protocol, no more, no less. But he's just standing there again," a bewildered tourist pointed out, camera still raised, "and certainly like nothing happened." "That's rather the point," the officer replied with a small smile. "Ceremonial duty continues regardless of interruption. The discipline you're seeing is the same discipline that operates in combat zones." He gestured toward Pennington's now resumed immaculate stance. "That ability to maintain composure under provocation isn't weakness. It's the foundation of effective military service." Pennington, released from the immediate security situation, executed a perfect pivot and returned to his post with the same mechanical precision that had characterized his response. Within seconds, he had resumed his ceremonial stance exactly as he had been before the incident, eyes forward, posture immaculate, ceremonial rifle position with textbook correctness. As Axel continued his increasingly desperate protests, a palace representative had arrived to document the incident. "We'll need statements from witnesses," she announced calmly, clipboard in hand. "Physical interference with the Queen's Guard is taken extremely seriously." "It was just a demonstration," Axel insisted, his voice rising as the reality of his situation became clearer. "I wasn't attacking him." "The security footage will be reviewed," the representative replied without inflection, "along with numerous tourist videos." I expect she nodded toward the crowd, many of whom had indeed captured the entire incident on their phones. "The facts will speak for themselves." As security led Axel and his suddenly distant companions through the palace gates, the autumn breeze returned, rustling the fallen leaves across the courtyard. Tourists gradually resumed their photographs, now with a noticeably wider perimeter around Silas Pennington's post. The atmosphere had transformed where before there had been the usual tourist excitement. Now there was a tangible current of genuine respect. Remarkable restraint, an elderly gentleman commented to his companion as they walked past. In my day, the response might not have been quite so measured. His companion nodded, military bearing evident in his posture despite his advanced age. Different times, he replied, but the fundamentals remain the same. Silas Pennington stood exactly as he had before the incident, eyes forward, posture perfect, the embodiment of centuries of tradition. The only difference, perhaps imperceptible to casual observers, was a certain depth in his gaze, not pride, not satisfaction, but the quiet knowledge of duty properly performed under challenging circumstances. Nearby, a young boy tugged at his father's sleeve, whispering, "Dad, is that really the same guard from before?" The father nodded, explaining in hushed tones about discipline and dedication, creating a teaching moment that would likely remain with the child long after their London holiday had ended. A tour guide leading a group of international students seized the educational opportunity. "The Guards regiments have defended the sovereign for over 3 centuries, she explained quietly. "What you've just witnessed is the perfect balance of ceremonial tradition and practical capability." The students, who moments earlier had been checking their phones between photos, now listened with genuine interest, their perspective on the tourist attraction fundamentally altered by what they'd seen. Among the crowd, a silver-haired woman in a wheelchair, herself wearing a discreet veteran's pin on her lapel, smiled with quiet appreciation. "That's exactly how it should be done," she remarked to her companion. "Minimum force, maximum control. Some things in the service haven't changed." Her companion, noting the ribbon on her jacket that spoke of her own military service from decades past, nodded in silent agreement. Different era, different conflict, same fundamental values. The off-duty officer exchanged a final glance with Pennington before departing, not a smile, not a nod, but a moment of professional recognition that required no words or gestures. It was the silent acknowledgement between two individuals who understood that discipline isn't measured by what you do when everyone is watching, but by what you're prepared to do when no one is. As the afternoon continued, new visitors arrived, unaware of the drama that had unfolded just minutes earlier. To them, Silas Pennington was simply another guard at his post, a photo opportunity, a symbol of British tradition. Few would ever understand the reality behind the ceremonial facade, the years of training and combat experience that informed each moment of his seemingly static duty.